A young female judge was stopped and brutally assaulted by two police officers on a deserted street. It seemed she would remain silent forever out of fear and to protect her reputation. But what she did next shook the entire American justice system to its core. "You don't look like any judge I've ever seen." The words drifted into the open window of Avery Keller's sedan, like a wasp, small but stinging. She glanced up from her driver's license, her hands still resting composed on the steering wheel. Outside, the early light filtered through a canopy of low-hanging oaks lining the government district. Traffic was non-existent, the silence uncanny. Officer Davis loomed at her door, thumbs hooked in his utility belt. Beside him, Officer Miller circled the car, peering in through the back window like he expected to find a stash of contraband under the seat. "I'm on my way to the Department of Justice." "Avery," said calmly, her voice even practiced. "My name is Avery Keller. I'm a newly appointed judge with the D.C. Circuit Court." Davis smirked, shifting his stance. His boots made a soft scuff against the pavement. "Well, Your Honor, we stopped you because your left taillight's out. You'd know that if you weren't so busy dressing for a photo op." Avery looked straight ahead, spine taut against the leather seat. Her blazer, a tailored navy wool, felt suddenly too tight at the shoulders. She tapped the home button on her phone, bringing up the official appointment letter from the White House counsel's office. She angled the screen toward Davis. "That's not a badge," he said, dismissing it with a twitch of his jaw. "We need proper identification. I didn't bring my judicial ID." Avery admitted, still holding the phone. "I wasn't expecting to need it. This is a secure federal zone. Surveillance cameras cover every inch of this street." Miller stopped pacing. "You saying we're lying?" "I'm saying," Avery replied more carefully, "now that you can verify my identity with a single call to courthouse security." Davis snorted and leaned in. His breath smelled of bitter coffee. "Tell you what, Judge Keller, why don't you step out of the vehicle? Let's handle this back at the precinct." Avery blinked. A single drop of sweat rolled down her spine. She weighed her tone, her words, her skin, and the uniforms in front of her. There was no backup on this block. No passers-by. The only witness was the dash cam. She wasn't sure was still rolling. "I don't consent to being detained without cause," she said. Voice flatter. "Now." Miller opened her passenger door without a word. The creak of the hinge sounded like something old breaking. "Step out, ma'am," he said. The first cuff clicked tight around her wrist. Inside the patrol car, the seat reeked of bleach and vinyl. Avery's hands bound behind her, pressed against hard plastic. She stared at the partition, the faint smudge of fingerprints left by previous detainees. One was shaped like a child's hand. They didn't speak to her on the ride. Davis whistled tunelessly. Miller hummed a gospel hymn she couldn't place his voice soft and off-key. Her mind began to break the moment into frames, the red of the lights on the dash, the flicker of the GPS rerouting the taste of bile rising in her throat. She focused on breathing through her nose, slow, and measured the way her therapist once taught her after her mother's funeral. They didn't speak to her on the ride. Davis whistled tunelessly. Miller hummed a gospel hymn she couldn't place his voice soft and off-key. The discordance grated on Avery's nerves, a disturbing counterpoint to the fear that coiled in her gut. Her mind began to break the moment into frames. The red of the lights on the dash, the flicker of the GPS rerouting the taste of bile rising in her throat. She focused on breathing through her nose, slow, and measured the way her therapist once taught her after her mother's funeral. The precinct was small, a single-story brick building tucked away on a side street far removed from the bustling city center. It felt deserted. The silence in the booking area was thick, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Davis led her through a dimly lit corridor, the stale air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. Her heels clicked on the linoleum floor, each step echoing the growing dread in her heart. They took her phone, her purse, her dignity. She was processed without a word, her fingerprints taken, her photograph snapped. The flashbulb momentarily blinded her. a stark metaphor for the darkness that was rapidly enveloping her. No paperwork was offered, no explanation given. She was a ghost in the system, a judge stripped of her authority, reduced to a suspect without a crime. They shoved her into a small, bare cell, the metal door clanging shut with a finality that made her flinch. The cold concrete seeped through the thin fabric of her suit, clinging to her skin like an unwanted caress, a chilling reminder of her powerlessness. She sat on the narrow cot, the rough blanket grazing her thighs, its coarse texture sending shivers up her spine. The blank wall stared back, time dissolving into a haze of dread. The door creaked open and Davis and Miller stepped inside, their predatory smiles glinting with a dark hunger. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken intent. Davis leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear as he purred. "So, Judge, still think you're untouchable." Avery pressed herself against the wall, her pulse racing, her skin prickling under the weight of their gazes. "This is wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling, her lips quivering as she fought to hold herself together. "You have no right." Miller's hand shot out, seizing her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh with a possessive grip. "Oh, we have every right," he growled, his eyes raking over her body, lingering on the curve of her hips, the rise and fall of her chest. His leer was no longer blank, but charged with a primal, unsettling desire. "You're ours now, Judge." What followed was a whirlwind of violation, each moment steeped in a twisted sensuality that left her reeling. Davis's hands roamed with deliberate slowness, tracing the contours of her body through the thin fabric, his touch both invasive and mocking. "Look at you," he murmured, his voice low and taunting. All that power stripped away. Miller's fingers brushed against her neck, trailing down with a teasing cruelty, each contact igniting a mix of revulsion and helpless heat in her core. They filmed it all, their laughter, a dark, guttural symphony that filled the cell. The camera's cold lens devoured her, capturing every shudder, every gasp. "Smile for us!" Judge Davis taunted, his words dripping with perverse delight as he leaned in, his lips grazing her ear, his breath a violation of its own. "Show the world how you break. Please." Avery begged, her voice, a fractured whisper raw with shame and desperation. Her body trembled, caught in a storm of fear and unwanted sensation, her pleas dissolving into the suffocating air. Their hands, their words, their eyes, they stripped her bare, peeling away every layer of her dignity. When they finally left, she collapsed onto the cold concrete, her body aching, her skin marked by their touch. The cell's silence was deafening, amplifying the lingering echoes of their cruelty, her shattered dignity scattered like shards of glass. Hours later, just before dawn, they dragged her out, her body aching, her spirit crushed. Davis leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "If you breathe a word of this," he hissed, "that video goes viral. Your career, your life will be over." He tossed her purse at her feet. The metallic clink of her keys against the concrete floor was the only sound in the desolate hallway. The heavy door swung open, releasing her into the cold morning air. The first rays of sunlight, instead of offering warmth and hope, felt like a cruel mockery. She stumbled out, a ghost of her former self, forever marked by the darkness she had endured. Avery sat on the edge of her bathtub, still wearing the clothes from the night before. The navy blazer lay crumpled in the hallway, tossed like evidence. She hadn't had the strength to hang it. Her blouse, once crisp and dignified, was stained at the collar. She hadn't cried, not then. But now the tears came soundlessly, as if her body were catching up to the devastation her mind had already recorded. The light above the mirror buzzed faintly. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed and grim. A small scratch marked her cheek. She didn't know when it happened. Maybe during the struggle. Maybe when she fell. The skin under her eyes was dark, her lips colorless. She leaned closer, squinting, searching for some sign, something human. But all she saw was a woman unrecognizable. Her hand moved without thought to her pinky finger. The ring was gone. It had slid off somewhere, maybe in the cell, maybe in the squad car, or maybe she had left it on the passenger seat, though she couldn't recall for certain. Her mother's ring, a gift from another generation of women who carried themselves with pride, dignity, restraint. Avery had worn it through law school, through every hearing, every ruling. It was more than metal. It was memory. And now, it was lost. She leaned back and exhaled slowly. Then came the question, small, trembling, but unavoidable. "If I don't believe in justice," she whispered, "then who will?" It echoed in the silence like a verdict. The next morning she returned to the courthouse. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floors. Her posture, as always, was straight. No one noticed the tremor in her hands when she reached for her chamber's door. No one saw how her fingers curled tightly around the handle of her leather briefcase, like it was the only thing holding her together. She presided over 3 cases that day, civil minor. She spoke with measured calm, careful authority. The attorneys nodded. The clerks filed their paperwork. Everything functioned as it should, but beneath her robe, her skin flinched at every loud voice. Every raised tone reminded her of locked doors and unblinking eyes. At lunch, she sat alone in her office and stared at the half-eaten sandwich on her plate. A knock at the door made her startle. "You all right, Judge Keller?" her assistant, Donna, asked. Avery looked up, forced a smile. "Just tired," she said. "Didn't sleep well." Donna hesitated for a beat too long, then nodded. "Let me know if you need anything." "I will." The door clicked shut again. That night, she couldn't sleep. The apartment was too quiet. Every floorboard creak sounded like footsteps. Every passing siren triggered a tightening in her chest. She sat in the living room, wrapped in a gray cardigan, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Her mother smiling at her, swearing in. Her and her father outside the courthouse. A shot of the ring on her finger. Clear, centered, unknowing. A sudden wave of nausea rose. She put the phone down and walked into the kitchen, opened the window. The spring air was cool, clean. Somewhere below, a couple laughed on the sidewalk. It sounded foreign, like a language she no longer spoke. She reached for her recorder, the one she used for notes, and placed it on the table. Hands trembling, she turned it on. "March 17th, she began. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "This is Judge Avery Keller. I am recording this in my own home. This is not a legal statement. Not yet. She paused. A long, painful breath. "I was attacked by 2 police officers, Davis and Miller. March 15th. Early morning hours." She stopped the recording and closed her eyes. The next week passed in fragments. She moved like a ghost through her routine hearing motions, issuing rulings, managing chambers. But her nights were spent listening to her own voice on repeat. Every time she replayed that message, she found the strength to take one more step. She began collecting a backup of the dash cam from her car, security footage from nearby buildings, receipts showing her route that morning. Every moment she passed Davis and Miller in the courthouse hallways, silent, smirking, smug, she made mental notes of their movements. Every look, every word. She started slipping her phone into her pocket with the voice recorder running, just in case. The risk was constant. If they found out, they could leak the video, frame her, destroy her. But fear and silence had already taken enough. One Friday evening, she stood across from a quiet brick cafe tucked behind an old church. The sign read, "Ruth's Table." She remembered the place. She had once met a retired judge here for coffee and advice years ago. The conversation came back to her now. You want to survive in this system, know who you trust, and keep your spine straight, even when your voice shakes. Inside, a woman in her early 50s sat near the window reviewing notes. Auburn hair in a tidy bun, a long wool coat folded neatly over her chair. Sarah Jensen, defense attorney. known for unearthing police misconduct cases for taking on impossible fights and winning. Avery stepped in. Her coat still buttoned to the collar. Ms. Jensen. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were sharp but kind. Judge Keller. I've followed your work. They shook hands. Avery's grip was firm. Thank you for meeting me. They ordered tea. Avery stirred hers twice, then stopped. She didn't know where to begin, but when she looked at Sarah, the lines around her eyes, the quiet strength in her face, something broke loose. They hurt me, Avery said softly. 2 officers. I need help. Sarah didn't blink. She simply leaned forward. Start at the beginning. They sat there for over 2 hours. Avery didn't say everything, but she said enough. Sarah listened, her expression darkening with every detail. Not a single doubt crossed her face. You're not the first, Sarah said, voice quiet but firm. And I'm betting you won't be the last. But if you're ready to fight, I'm with you. All the way. It began on a Monday. The sky was overcast, the clouds thick like bruises. Spring in D.C. had turned gray overnight. In the quiet of Sarah Jensen's office, a narrow space above a used bookstore in Adams Morgan, Avery sat across from her palms flat against a folder labeled in bold black ink, Keller v. MPD. The folder held copies of everything they had assembled over the past week. Transcripts, photos, surveillance requests, and most damning of all, the audio file Avery had secretly recorded. A grainy but unmistakable soundscape of intimidation, cruelty, and abuse. Davis's voice on tape was calm, even conversational. Miller's laughter, low and sinister, came through like a blade wrapped in silk. When Avery first played it back, she couldn't breathe for nearly a full minute. Now it was no longer just a recording. It was evidence. A voice she had reclaimed. Sarah glanced up from her desk. You sure you want this out there? Avery looked out the window. Down below, pedestrians moved with umbrellas bobbing like dark jellyfish. She nodded once. They didn't give me a choice, she said. Now I'm giving them none. They filed the formal complaint. First direct to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Then came the calculated leak. A package went to 3 major newsrooms, the Washington Post, the Times, and a local progressive news site known for digging into police corruption. Sarah's contact at the Post, an editor named Elise Danvers, confirmed receipt by noon. By evening, the audio had gone live. It spread like wildfire. The media called it the Keller recording. 9 minutes and 22 seconds of unfiltered power abuse. News anchors spoke of it with tight jaws and furrowed brows. Podcasts picked apart each word online. The clip circulated like oxygen through dry brush, igniting outrage, disbelief, and a familiar, bitter recognition. She sounds scared. One commenter posted, "She sounds like me," said another. Avery watched it all unfold from her living room, her laptop perched on her knees. The world for once was listening, but the relief didn't come. Not yet. She knew better. Within 48 hours, Davis and Miller stepped in front of cameras. They stood flanked by uniformed officers and a PR consultant in a navy suit. The press conference was short and poisonous. "These are baseless accusations," Davis said, his voice carefully trained. "We believe Judge Keller is suffering from emotional instability, possibly linked to the pressures of her recent appointment," Miller added. "We respect the bench, but when someone abuses their position to fabricate claims, that's dangerous. For all of us." Then came the personal attacks. Grainy photos of Avery at a college party surfaced, drinks in hand, eyes blurred by flash. A doctored email chain appeared on a conspiracy blog implying a romantic entanglement with a defense attorney, an old classmate she'd barely spoken to since graduation. "She's doing this for attention," the blog said. A power grab. A media stunt. It burned. Avery didn't leave her apartment for 3 days. Reporters camped outside her building. An anonymous threat appeared in her inbox. "Better watch that mouth. Judge cameras can catch more than audio next time. But Sarah didn't blink. She activated her network. Civil rights attorneys from New York to Oakland, a retired federal prosecutor, a nonprofit that had once gone toe-to-toe with the LAPD. Within a week, they had built a quiet army. "We're going to turn this into discovery," Sarah said, sifting through Davis's employment record. "If he's done this before, and he has, we'll find it." They did small complaints buried in sealed settlements, a missing dashcam tape from 2019, a woman named Lizette Alvarez, undocumented at the time, who once described a night just like Avery's in a testimony that was dismissed for lack of corroboration. Now Lizette was ready to speak. Then came two more, one from an immigrant advocacy center in Ward 7, another from a women's shelter in Northeast. They'd stayed quiet out of fear, but Avery's voice had broken the surface, and the ripples spread. Avery met the first survivor at a closed community meeting in a church basement. The air smelled of old wood and cheap coffee. Folding chairs creaked as women took their seats. Most spoke in low tones. A few wore scarves over their heads, not for modesty, but anonymity. Avery sat beside Sarah, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't wear her robe. No bench, no podium, just the cardigan she'd worn since that long gray morning. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't rehearse. "I thought I could carry it," she said, "that it would fade, but silence only feeds them. I didn't come here today as a judge. I came as someone who was made to feel powerless, and I'm not letting them take that from me again." The room was still. One woman nodded, eyes glassy. Then Lizette spoke. Her voice shook. Her hands, too. But her story came out like a cracked dam. She had feared deportation. She had trusted the badge, and she had never reported until now. One by one, others followed. That night, Sarah drove them back through the dark streets. The city hushed after a long day. Avery stared out the window. "They're going to keep coming after me," she said. "They already are," Sarah replied. "But they're not winning." Avery looked at her hand. The ring was still gone, but in its place a faint indentation remained. Small, circular, and persistent, like a promise not yet broken. They said, "I'd lose everything," she murmured, "but I think I'm just starting to find it." The courthouse steps gleamed under a hard winter sun, pale stone catching the light like bone. Snow had melted in patches, leaving slick puddles where reporters' boots stamped stories into the wet concrete. Satellite trucks lined the avenue like tanks. Security flanked the building in crisp navy uniforms, silent but watchful. Inside, the heat buzzed faintly through the vents, but it didn't reach the gallery. It never did. Avery stood just beyond the double oak doors, the collar of her blouse pressed flat beneath the tailored gray of her suit. Her hand drifted to her pinky without thinking. Still bare, still marked. She let it fall. Sarah leaned in, voice low, steady. "Take your time. You don't need to rush anything." "I won't," Avery said. Her tone surprised even her grounded calm, the kind of calm forged under pressure, not born of peace. The courtroom beyond was nearly full. Rows of press badges gleamed like coins. A hushed tension clung to every face. This wasn't just a trial. It was spectacle. It was precedent. It was a reckoning. And in the center of it all, two men sat in tailored suits, smirking as if this were another procedural hearing, not a criminal trial with life sentences at stake. Davis met her eyes as she stepped forward. His expression didn't waver, but something in hers had changed. The oath was brief. Her voice didn't falter. She folded her hands in her lap, once seated, letting the silence stretch a moment longer than expected. "I'm Judge Avery Keller," she began, her voice clear in the hush. "But today I am here only as a citizen, a survivor." She didn't look at the defendants as she spoke. She looked at the jury, at the gallery, at the women in the front row, Lizette Alvarez among them, shoulders squared, gaze unflinching. They used their badges like weapons. Avery continued, not to protect, but to control, to punish, to silence. I was afraid that if I spoke, no one would believe me, that I would lose everything I had worked for. But what I've come to understand is that silence was costing me far more. The room held its breath. "I'm not here to destroy them," she said, her voice quieter now. "I'm here to reclaim what they tried to take, and to make sure they never take it from anyone else again." Testimony followed. Testimony. Lizette's voice cracked once, then found its rhythm. A former rookie cop testified under subpoena. He'd seen Miller lose his temper on patrol, heard rumors he'd never dared repeat. A records clerk presented documents, long-buried internal complaints that had disappeared after a captain's signature. Each voice added another stone to the mountain. When the prosecution played Avery's original recording, the courtroom seemed to tilt. The cold cruelty in Davis's voice, the smirking satisfaction in Miller's drew audible gasps. A woman in the back wept openly. One juror had to excuse herself for a moment. The defense flailed, arguing misidentification, emotional instability, political ambition, but every tactic echoed hollow against the tide of evidence and testimony. When the jury returned after deliberating, the hush was immediate. The judge, a senior justice with tired eyes and a history of cutting through showmanship, nodded solemnly. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a school principal in his 50s, stood. "We have, Your Honor." The charges were read one by one. Guilty. 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 Avery didn't cry. She didn't smile. She only let her shoulders drop an inch, like something heavy had finally been set down. The sentences were handed down 2 days later. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for both Davis and Miller. Charges included aggravated sexual assault conspiracy to obstruct justice and abuse of power under color of law. Justice at last had a voice. After the trial, Avery disappeared from headlines. She turned down interviews, declined book deals, walked past speaking requests from law schools and human rights panels. Instead, she returned to her chambers and quietly resumed her docket. Land disputes, custody battles, the dull throb of everyday justice. But something had shifted. Where once her rulings were cautious, calibrated for optics for balance, they were now bolder, grounded, less concerned with pleasing institutions and more concerned with serving truth. In the spring, she joined Sarah to co-found the Ring Initiative, named for the faint circle still etched on her finger, a non-profit offering legal aid and trauma counseling to victims of institutional abuse. Their first location was a renovated warehouse near the Anacostia River, painted bright white, sunlit, clean. At the opening ceremony, Sarah kept her remarks brief. "We built this for the ones who were told to keep quiet," she said. "The ones who thought no one would believe them. We're here now, and we do." Avery spoke last. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about all of us. Anyone who's been made to feel small by someone with a badge, a title, or a threat. Dignity doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the human." Over the months, women came in waves. Survivors, whistleblowers, some silent, some sobbing. Avery didn't always speak. Often she just sat beside them, hands folded, a quiet presence. That was enough. She still had nightmares, though less frequent now. She still carried the ache of that night and probably always would. But she had something else, too. Resolve. Faith, hard-earned, battle-tested, in the idea that justice didn't live only in courtrooms, but in every hard truth spoken aloud, in every woman who dared to rise. In early fall, as red leaves began to coat the city sidewalks, a young woman approached Avery after a speech at Howard University's law school. She looked barely 21, wearing a threadbare blazer and a worn notebook under one arm. "I wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for what you did, but for proving someone like me could matter." Avery looked at her, saw her former self in the eyes, nervous, hopeful, brilliant, beneath the doubt. "You already do," she replied, offering a small smile. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As the girl left, Avery stood alone for a moment beneath the campus trees. She touched her pinky again, not out of habit but as ritual. The ring was still gone, but what remained her voice, her purpose. The echo of every woman she'd stood beside was more enduring than gold, and far harder to silence. The story of Avery Keller is a deeply moving and powerful narrative that captures the harrowing journey of a woman who transforms from a victim of abuse to a beacon of justice and resilience. What makes Avery's journey so impactful is not only the traumatic ordeal she endures, but the quiet strength and unwavering moral compass she holds on to in the aftermath. Her silence is not weakness. It is a moment of reckoning, of survival before the storm she chooses to unleash through truth. Avery's transformation is gradual and authentic. We see her struggle with fear, shame, and the crippling weight of societal bias. She is not portrayed as a superhero, but as a human being forced into the impossible, choosing courage over comfort. Her decision to stand against the very system she once served reflects a rare kind of bravery, one that risks everything for the sake of others. Her partnership with Sarah Jensen symbolizes the power of solidarity among women, and their bond becomes a vehicle for change. What resonates most is the human dignity. Avery reclaims not just for herself, but for countless others who had been silenced. The courtroom becomes more than a place of law. It becomes a stage for truth, and when she helps form an organization to protect survivors, her legacy shifts from personal justice to collective healing. The story teaches us that justice is not always immediate, nor is it clean. It demands grit, sacrifice, and the will to confront darkness with truth. Most importantly, it reminds us that silence can be broken, and when it is, it can light the way for others. Avery's journey is a testament to the strength found in vulnerability and the enduring power of one voice raised against injustice. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, may God bless you and be with you every step of the way.